Hello, everybody. I'm Greg Forster with Karam Fellowship. This is our latest member spotlight, and today we're talking to Denise Daniels, longtime member of our community and also the author of a new book, Working for Better, a new approach to faith at work. Denise, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Greg. It's good to be here.
Tell us, Denise, what's life-giving for you as an educator?
So this is going to sound like a cheater answer because it's kind of cliche, but really it's true. It's my students. I really, really love the students that I get the privilege of working with. And part of that might be unique to my particular institution. I find, so I teach at Wheaton College, and I find the students that we have, because Wheaton does have it has a faith commitment expectation of not just faculty and staff, but also students. We end up with maybe a little bit more of a homogenous student group than you might get at a lot of other institutions. But I also find that these students are kind of uniformly earnest in that they are faithful. They are trying to figure out how their faith connects with life generally, but also work specifically. And they're trying to do it at this very critical time, obviously on the cusp of adolescence, adulthood, and just trying to figure out who they want to be in the world. And I find it an amazing privilege and very energizing, frankly, to be able to work with them. So, like I said, kind of a cliche answer, but it is true.
Yeah, there's nothing like an earnest and motivated group of students. Last night I just did a Zoom discussion group where I began by saying, I've got discussion questions ready, but if you have questions about the material, please ask them. And we just spent the whole hour processing their questions because they had enough, and they were great, smart questions. So we did all the key learnings I wanted to get to. We got to them because they knew what questions to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of gets me excited inside when I'm having these chances to have conversations with students who are bright and capable and thoughtful and faithful about their faith and their lives.
One thing that does for me is it helps me keep my spirits up when I look at everything going on in the world.
Yeah.
It's really nice that the rising generations are both motivated and thinking carefully.
Yeah, I think that's true. And maybe it's not true of every single person in the generation, but enough of them, enough that I get to see that you're right. It is a sense of hopefulness.
Well, if you go to the paint store, you'll find they do sell broad brushes in the paint store, so sometimes it's okay.
Yeah.
Denise, let me ask you, would you tell us about an experience of collaboration, either one that you've recently been in that was really fruitful, or maybe one that's coming up that you're excited about?
Okay. How about if I give you both? Is that okay?
That's
Um,
permissible.
very early in my career, this is like back in 1996 when I was applying for my very first faculty job. I got a little bit of a ding from one of the older professors who was in the part of the hiring process, and this at the time was at Seattle Pacific University. And he wanted to know why I published with so many other people. How come I wasn't doing enough individual publications? And my response really was, well, I like to work with people. And so and other people make me smarter. And to be honest, that answer is still true today. Some 30 years later, I like to work with other people, and other people make me smarter. So I would say that much of my career has been collaborative. And most recently, the book that you mentioned, Working for Better, is coming out with Elaine Howard Eklund. She and I worked together for about 6 years. Um, Working on developing this data that we draw from on the book in the book, trying to understand how people in the United States think about their faith in the context of work. And so we surveyed almost 16,000 people in the US. We interviewed about 300 of them. And we have a very, very robust data set that we were able then to talk together about and to write together about. We actually have about 10 peer-reviewed journal articles that have come out of that data. And then this is the second of two books that is coming out of that data set as well. We have another book that came out in October of 24 called Religion in a Changing Workplace that was published by Oxford University Press as well. So that was a collaborative project and a collaborative experience that really was wonderful. And to be honest, one of the reasons that we decided to go down the path of even doing the project in the first place was because we had, through another project and another experience, we had met each other, we had become friends, but we were at these two very different institutions in very different places in the United States. And we said, we're never going to see each other again unless we work together. And so we came up with a research grant and proposal, and we got a grant, and we're able then to work together for a pretty significant amount of time. So that was one that's kind of coming to an end now in the past, but I'm just picking up a new project that I'm pretty excited about. And this new project is actually funded by NetView, which is funded by the Lilly Endowment as well. And this is going to be a longitudinal examination of vocation and calling among students. And so students and then young alums out of a number of different institutions where NetView has provided funding over the past 10 or 20 years. And that project is in collaboration with Brian Dick at Colorado State University, and then also um, I'm totally blanking on his name now. This is a terrible thing that you should be doing with collaborators is not remembering their names. But Brian Dick and Ryan Duffy is my other co-collaborator, and Ryan is a faculty member at University of Florida. So the two of them and I will be working on this. It's going to be a 4-year project starting this summer on calling. So that's one that I'm excited about and looking forward to.
Very exciting. Looking forward to seeing that. I have co-written several books, and it's not less work
Right.
because you split the work. It's more work because every word in the book has to be approved by every author. And yet,
Exactly.
if your competencies complement one another, it really transforms and turbocharges the work. I wonder if I could ask you on the book that you've just written that's coming out now, how did that kind of complementary competencies work in that situation?
Yeah, so we went back and forth. And I mean, just like you describe, every person has to approve every word. And so we struggled at some places with what we were both comfortable with. This particular book, the one that's coming out in August, the Working for Better book, is published by University Press, which this is the first time that Elaine has published with a Christian publisher. She herself is a sociologist, very accomplished. She's at Rice University, but really all of her publications have been with secular presses, even though she herself is a person of faith, a Christian. And so she was kind of struggling a little bit, I think, with what does it mean to out yourself in some sense in a secular context as a professing Christian. So I didn't have the same kind of angst because I've always been out in terms of the kinds of institutions I've been a part of. So nobody is surprised by that. And I don't frankly think anybody really would be surprised about Elaine either. But it's a little bit of a different framing and a little bit of a different tone that you take when you're speaking explicitly as a Christian and to a Christian audience. So that was kind of an interesting back and forth as well in that process. I think it turned out well. I think I'm really pleased, frankly, with that book, and I'm hopeful that it really does have a good broad impact.
Sounds like a good formula for avoiding both speaking only within the Christian bubble and compromising too much to speak outside it. So, looking
Yeah,
forward to reading that. Let
yeah.
me ask you a third question. What are one or two challenges you see coming down the road in the world of Christian education, and how can we get ready?
Yeah. So, before we started recording, you and I were briefly talking and kind of joking about AI. But that's, I think, very clearly something that is very much at the forefront of many, many faculty and student and institutions awareness right now. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And on the one hand, is AI a tool that we can use to make ourselves better and sharper and write clearer and all that kind of thing? Or is it really just going to subvert the entire educational process? And I go back and forth depending on the day or depending on the student assignment that I'm looking at. And sometimes I think it's going to be a really helpful tool. And other times I think, wow, we are just going to completely handicap an entire generation if we give them access too soon. And so I think it's maybe there's an element of both and we're going to have to be pretty careful with it, much in the same way that we probably should have been more careful with cell phones, for example. And, I think Jonathan Haidt has done a lot of work in that area that has highlighted and profiled some of the downsides that we didn't realize up front that we were things that we were doing to ourselves. And I think AI kind of has that same potential to shape us and frankly to malform us. Um, and so I think we need to be very, very cautious of that. But at the same time, I'm not anti-AI. I think it's got some real potential to be a useful tool as long as it's a tool and it's not our master. So that's one area that I think is coming down the pike. The other thing that I was thinking about with this particular question has to do with what I see right now as sort of an increasingly pluralistic context that we find ourselves in, particularly in the United States, but also an increasingly polarized context. So that combination of pluralization and polarization, I think, has really significant implications for higher ed, for Christian higher ed, and for all of us, maybe personally. And so, how do we attend to that kind of um, changing context that we find ourselves in? How do we engage people who are very different from ourselves? How do we recognize the image of God in people who are very different from ourselves? How do we listen carefully to people when we are all of us in some ways curating our own echo chambers in various social media contexts? How do we learn to hear from folks who are quite different? How do we learn to not other them? How do we learn to be thoughtful about what they might be bringing to the table? And how do we engage in this pluralistic context well in a way that honors God? So I think that would be the other challenge that I think is really going to become increasingly salient for Christian educators.
Right. And that smartphone revolution you were referring to before, one of many factors in play, uh,
Absolutely.
polarization and
Yeah.
the fragmentation of the cultural environment.
Yeah.
And I
It's
think
like,
that, good.
I was just going to say, I mean, that whole, all social media is designed to give you what you want. And so what that means is that you start to see the same things over and over. And so I made the comment that we're creating these self-designed echo chambers, and we are. And so how do we get out of those? Is there a way to engage with people who are different from us? And I do think, and this is one of the points of the book that we're publishing, the Working for Better. I do think that the workplace can be one of those places where we rub shoulders with folks who are quite different from us. And how do we take advantage of that opportunity to learn from, to contribute to, and to really be fully human with folks who may not share our beliefs, may not share our values, may not share our worldviews, but nonetheless are made in the image of God.
15 years ago, when I got into the faith and work movement, it was the hope that the workplace might be a place where the pluralistic problem is bridged. That brought me in as big and as deep as I got into it, because
Yeah.
I had been looking in my other work at this problem of how do you hold a society together if people don't have the same beliefs about ultimate things, right? If people don't share their cosmological worldview, how
Yeah.
can they go to the grocery store and buy and sell with each other? And how can they, send their kids to schools and all the other things people need to do? And
Mhm.
it was when I saw the faith and work movement, I said, "Oh, this might help with that."
So
Uh,
maybe, Greg, you were just way ahead of the curve when you came in and were thinking
well,
about those things.
in this, as in so many other ways, my life is a demonstration of the principle that it does not pay to be even 15 minutes, much less 15 years ahead of your time. Denise, thank you so much for joining us and for all that you do in our community.
Yeah, you are welcome. It's good to be here.